At 11 minutes past 5 in the morning, Eastern Time, January 28th, 2021, a computer at the clearinghouse that settles America's stock trades sent an automated notice to a brokerage in Menlo Park, California. No phone call, no voice. Just a machine informing another machine of a number, roughly $3 billion, due before the market opened. The men and women who ran the brokerage were shaken out of bed in the dark, and by sunrise, they had made a decision that turned a stock market story into a national event. Millions of people woke up that morning, opened a trading app called Robinhood, and discovered that the buy button was gone. The stock was GameStop, a chain of video game stores in dying shopping malls, and in 3 weeks, it had risen more than 1,600%. Everyone has told this story as a fable. The little guys against Wall Street, David with a smartphone, the sworn testimony, and the postmortem the regulators published 9 months later tell a stranger one. Think of it as a poker game, played for $70 billion, where none of the players could see each other's cards. And the only way to understand what happened is to walk around the table and turn the hands over, one at a time. The first hand belongs to a man in a basement in Massachusetts. Keith Gill grew up in Brockton, the son of a truck driver and a registered nurse. The first in his family to finish a 4-year degree, graduating in 2009, straight into the wreckage of the Great Recession, without a long-term job. For years, his salary never cleared $40,000. By day, he built financial education courses for an insurance company. By night, wearing a red headband in his basement, he streamed stock analysis to almost no one under the name Roaring Kitty. In June of 2019, he put about $53,000, a life's savings, into call options on GameStop. His first post about it carried a title only an investor could love. "Hey Barry, thanks a bunch for jacking up my cost basis." His case was simple. The market had priced GameStop for death, and he thought death was not yet certain. New consoles were coming. The company had cash. It was a bet almost nobody wanted to hear. On his final stream of 2020, his audience topped out at 96 people watching at once. On Christmas morning, he had 529 YouTube subscribers. These numbers are tiny, he would later tell Congress, under oath, and he was right. Across the table, invisible to the basement, sat one of the most successful investors of his generation. Gabe Plotkin had grown up middle class in Portland, Maine, and he named his hedge fund Melvin Capital after his grandfather, who ran a convenience store. Melvin had been short GameStop since the fund opened its doors in 2014, borrowing shares and selling them, betting that a retailer selling boxed video games in malls would be overtaken by digital downloads. It was legal, it was common, and for 6 straight years it was correct. Then, in the second week of January 2021, the cards started landing face up. Ryan Cohen, the billionaire founder of the pet food company Chewy, joined GameStop's board with plans to drag the retailer into e-commerce. The stock jumped, and somewhere in the data, the crowd on a Reddit forum called Wall Street Bets found the most extraordinary card in the deck, the short interest. Bets against GameStop amounted to 122.97% of every share available to trade. More shares had been sold short than existed, which can happen legally when the same borrowed share is lent again and again down a chain of buyers. The regulators would later note it was the only stock in America in that condition. If the price rose, the shorts would eventually have to buy their way out. The crowd realized it was holding the door. What followed was a cavalry charge with a login screen. On January 22nd, GameStop went from $43 to $72 in about 3 hours. Nearly 200 million shares changed hands that day in a stock that had averaged 7 million. On January 25th, Melvin Capital took an emergency infusion of $2.75 billion from 2 larger funds. Plotkin would insist, under oath, that Melvin was not bailed out, that we always had margin excess. What he could not deny was the tide. By the end of January, his fund had lost 53%, an estimated $6.8 billion. The posts flooding his inboxes, he testified, were laced with anti-Semitic slurs directed at me and others. Days before any trading app restricted anything, Melvin folded its hand and closed the position. Not because our investment thesis had changed, he said, but because something unprecedented was happening. Who was the crowd? It was Salvador Vergara, a 25-year-old security guard in Virginia who lived on rice and beans, drove a 1998 Honda Civic, and took out a $20,000 personal loan at 11% interest to buy GameStop at $234 a share. It was the anonymous Redditor who posted a screenshot of a final student loan payment, $23,504.45, scheduled at the peak of the frenzy, with the message, "I love you guys." And at the head of the table, it was Keith Gill, whose basement bet on the evening of January 27th was worth $47,973,000. He posted the screenshot and said nothing. He had told his family the news at Christmas in Brockton, months after they had lost his sister Sarah, suddenly at 43. It brought me tremendous joy, he said later, to share good news with my family for a change. We were millionaires, which brings us back to 5:11 in the morning, and the third hand, the houses. Robinhood had built its casino on a promise of free, instant trading, but underneath every American brokerage runs the same hidden machinery. Trades take 2 days to settle, and in those 2 days, a clearinghouse demands collateral against the risk that one side fails. The formula is mechanical. Volatility goes in, a deposit demand comes out. On January 25th, Robinhood's required deposit was about $124 million. 3 days later, the machine asked for 10 times that $3 billion more before breakfast. Between 6:30 and 7:30 that morning, Robinhood's operations team made the decision. Customers could sell GameStop, but they could no longer buy it. The clearinghouse, seeing the risk cut off, dropped its demand to $1.4 billion. The buy button had been traded for solvency. To the crowd, it looked like the casino had flipped the table the moment the players started winning. The theory wrote itself. Robinhood halted buying to rescue the hedge funds. Within 3 weeks, everyone was under oath in front of Congress, and there the theory met the testimony. Robinhood's chief executive, Vlad Tenev, "We don't answer to hedge funds." Ken Griffin, whose firm processed Robinhood's trades. I first learned of Robinhood's trading restrictions only after they were publicly announced. Plotkin, Melvin Capital played absolutely no role in those trading platforms' decisions. Under penalty of perjury, no one blinked. The villain, it turned out, was the plumbing, and the plumbing had worked exactly as designed. The hearing itself belonged to the man from the basement. Keith Gill appeared by video from Massachusetts in a winter when the country had watched a lawyer accidentally appear in court as a cat, and opened his sworn testimony with a deadpan inventory. "A few things I am not," he said. "I am not a cat. I am not an institutional investor, nor am I a hedge fund." The idea that he had lured unwitting investors, he said, was preposterous. And then he gave the crowd its epitaph, 4 words that fit on a headstone or a t-shirt. In short, I like the stock. Tenev offered contrition instead. What happened is unacceptable to us. To our customers, I'm sorry and I apologize. The regulators took 9 months to do the autopsy. When the Securities and Exchange Commission published its report in October, it quietly dismantled both of the stories everyone believed. The conspiracy? No evidence the Halts were ordered up by hedge funds, but the fable had it backwards too. Yes, the trapped shorts buying their way out had helped light the fire in those first days. The report's key sentence, though, gives the crowd the credit and the responsibility. It was the positive sentiment, not the buying to cover, that sustained the weeks-long price appreciation of GameStop stock. The squeeze was real at the start. Belief carried it the rest of the way. 40 days after the peak, the stock touched $40.59, and belief was all that remained. The bill arrived at every seat at the table. Salvador Vergara watched his $234 shares finish the winter at 52, still owing the loan and held anyway. Melvin Capital never recovered its nerve or its numbers. In May of 2022, Plotkin sent investors a letter announcing what he called the appropriate next step. The funds would be liquidated and the cash returned. The fund, named for his grandfather's convenience store, closed its doors. Robinhood survived, went public, and wears the buy button around its neck to this day. And Keith Gill? On the day the stock bottomed, he did the one thing no one at the table predicted. He doubled his position. That April, he exercised his options, took his holdings to 200,000 shares, posted one final update, and went silent for 3 years. He never apologized, never sold the fable, never claimed to be anything but a man who liked a stock. When he finally resurfaced in 2024, the screenshots showed 9 figures. The crowd had scattered. The belief apparently had not. The postmortem on GameStop found no villain, which is what makes it unsettling. A crowd discovered that belief, coordinated at scale, is a market force as real as any balance sheet. A clearinghouse formula, doing arithmetic in the dark, could switch that force off before breakfast. Nothing about the machinery has fundamentally changed. The crowd is still out there, and it remembers the one lesson January taught. The game was never rigged in the way they believed. It was rigged in a way nobody imagined, by plumbing no one had bothered to read. And somewhere, the next hand has already been dealt. The regulators signed their report in October of 2021, but the postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.